These are the world champions of Warzone. Team Biffle, which had Diaz Biffle, Shifty, and Sage in it, managed to win the World Series of Warzone, taking home the grand prize of $100,000. My team was also at the World Series of Warzone. After just 6 weeks of practice winning the wild card in the LCQ, we ended up finishing about 42nd, which is definitely nothing to be sad about, considering a lot of the teams we were up against had played together for years, and it was the first LAN experience for us all. So whilst we weren't super blown away with our performance, we were pretty happy with it, and it's something to build on for the future. Now, being in one of these tournaments versus watching at home are two entirely different things. Being in a lobby with 150 of the world's best players who are all capable of outgunning one another is an experience that I pretty much can't explain to you. It's terrifying, exciting, and all of these things packaged into one. We are talking about a lobby where people rarely make mistakes, rarely miss their shots, and everything is scrutinized at 100% of the time at the maximum level of scrutiny. So today, as somebody who played in this tournament and somebody who watched Diaz Biffle's team end up taking home the crown, I wanted to explain how they did this. What was the key to success? What did they do that was better than the rest of us? And why were they so successful? Because whilst it might seem just as straightforward as winning a game of Warzone or two, the reality is that there were lots of dynamics inside these lobbies that played with them and against them to produce the result that they got. So before I go into all of the technicalities about what these guys were doing in terms of the meta, in terms of how the actual games flowed, the gameplay pacing, and what they did to win the matches they did and get as many points as they did, it's worth mentioning that these three players are of a caliber that's honestly a cut above most people. You know, these are people who won't lose gunfights, very rarely make mistakes, and if they do lose a gunfight, they make sure there are backup options available to them so that that mistake can be fixed. You know, we're talking about three players right now with great game sense, great gunny, and pretty much the top caliber of what you would want from a Warzone player. These are guys who have been working harder, in my opinion, than pretty much anybody else, and have had lots of questions, accusations, and things about them before that people have doubted. And they really executed well in this tournament, and they deserve a lot of props for that. So the first thing we have to talk about is the meta for the World Series of Warzone. And the Signal 50 was a dominant part of that meta, which led to a lot of teams being killed fairly instantaneously. You couldn't really react to being team shot by a Signal 50, and because you could die instantly, it led to a lot of teams playing extremely passively. Lots of them sitting in buildings, lots of them looking for a positional advantage in the center of the zone as early as humanly possible. And just generally speaking, the mobility of World Series was very slow. You're going to see circles with, circle 4, circle 5, 100 players alive, and most of them are sitting in bushes, locking up buildings together in 3 stacks, or just trying to live for as long as possible. And because of this passive environment created by the Signal 50, it meant that the majority of teams, myself included, opted to play positional, looking for central buildings in the center of the circle to do our best to live for as long as possible, and try and get up some easy free kills along the way. And between this meta and the environment created by the meta, it actually set up a perfect way for Biffle's team to play and be successful in the tournament, because they were kind of doing the opposite of everybody else. Whilst most team were 2 stacking sniper rifles at a minimum and often 3 stacking them, Biffle's team was running 2 assault rifles, specifically the AK, which has the highest time to kill in pretty much all close range engagements. But what was most important is how they played their rotations. Whilst everybody else, myself included, was thinking positionally and thinking about getting central circle, Biffle's team played their drop location, played out a couple of kills in that area, and then rotated it late into the circle. With everybody at this event playing positional and playing inside buildings and playing as passively as possible, when you play the edge of the circle, you're actually in a better situation than when you play the center of the circle. And the reason for that is because at the edge of the circle, people have to move. It doesn't matter if they're hiding in a building, 3 stacking somewhere, or anything in between. If the gas starts hitting them, they have to start rotating. And you ended up with this scenario where all of these teams in the middle of the circle ended up challenging each other out and trading out kills, whilst teams on the edge of the circle were picking up freebies on players who had to move away from the gas, and were forced to change their location. And when you're being forced to move and you have to shoot and move on the go, using 2 assault rifles is dramatically better than team shotting with a sniper. So if you go through and watch a lot of Biffle's gameplay and the team that he was with Shifty and Sage, you see they pick up lots of kills on the edge of the circle after wiping through Hydroelectric, and they end up picking up all of these freebies fairly easily because it's teams who are just about surviving, just about rotating in because they've lost a man or two, and often when you get into those final couple of circles in the game, it's lots of teams who have bought back players or flared them off, meaning that there are lots of free kills in the sky who are just using pistols. Regaining inner customs with this many players alive is an extremely difficult thing to do, especially if you only have a pistol to hand. So effectively, you have a team like Biffle with 3 guys alive, all of their guns and all their equipment, coming into the edge of the zone already with a healthy amount of kills, and then reaching the final circle as one of the few teams left in a 3-man stack with all of their equipment, which allows them to just completely mop up the competition. They're challenging gunfights 3v2, they're getting freebies out of the sky from players trying to drop back in, and it just allows them to be purely dominant and play their own aggressive version of the game whilst everybody else was playing a positional version. And this might seem like a really advanced breakdown, even for these guys, because to them, they were probably just thinking, we're going to play our game, we're going to play our drop, and then we'll rotate into the circle when we have to. And there's a sort of sweet level of simplicity to the fact that they were just playing their own game of Warzone, which also happened to be the most successful way to do it. Now, Shifty, who was mostly IGLing this team throughout the entire event, was the person who dictated the flow of the game, and he was the person responsible for them clearing out their locality when they dropped in Hydroelectric, and the rotations later into the game. And I'm confident that he recognized that the positional gameplay meant that playing Edge made more sense, or at the bare minimum had a game plan in mind that just involved picking up some early kills and thinking about endgame when endgame got there. So between the Signal 50, the highly positional gameplay, and the fact that this team was hell-bent on playing aggressive at the edge of the zone, they put themselves in some really game-winning positions where all 3 of them were alive with their gear, picking up as many freebies as they could. But one of the things that really gave this team the edge were fixing their mistakes and consistency. There was a real thought process and effort and emphasis on picking up as many flares as possible, having equipment available to get people back into the game without being reliant on going to a buy station, making sure plates, ammo, and any other equipment such as kill streaks were available to them at any given time. This was all pre-planned. Once they won their drop in Hydroelectric and beat off all of the teams that happened to drop in with them, they then focused on late game. They focused on picking up some kills, getting cash together so that they had a flare each, and having the equipment like plates and ammo to really operate how they wanted to operate without having to think about the rest of the gameplay. They could just do their work, get the kills and buybacks that they needed. When they were killing other players, they were picking up more equipment, more flares, more plate boxes, allowing them to effectively just free flow their way through the end game of the match. And that was a really good foresight from them. So if one of them challenged a gunfight and it didn't go their way, they would just flare them off, bring them back into the fold, let the other 2 pick up a kill, get the equipment back on board, rinse and repeat. And the final piece of the puzzle is just consistency. These guys managed to win every single drop. They did not let any team beat them, whether that was at Hydroelectric, in the city, or wherever they happened to land. They won the majority, if not 90% of their gunfights, and if they lost it, they flared it off, got back in, regained, and kept going. And this isn't an easy feat either. And you have to bear in mind, by the time we were hitting sort of game 5, game 6, these guys were dropping in Hydroelectric almost uncontested. And there was about 5 to 6 teams dropping in Hydroelectric with these guys, who had all basically decided that they were so dominant and so good that it was time to go elsewhere. So whilst I'm making this sound as simple as, oh, they just won their drop, got their guns, and played the edge of the circle and got loads of kills, it absolutely isn't. They made so few mistakes throughout the whole process of this tournament, and to do that requires a real level of team synergy, a real level of communication, and a real level of understanding between each other that other teams might not have, or that these guys have generated over the course of a couple of months or a year or so that other teams are still in the process of building. It was a really impressive performance, and if you were somebody who was playing at the event, playing in one of those really difficult lobbies, there was an appreciation for just how many points these guys put up on the board, because it was nothing short of a really incredible feat. And the irony is that these are 3 of the most accused players in Warzone, people who have been constantly harassed for allegedly cheating, and on LAN without any second monitors, with a game official standing behind them, without being able to use any other devices except for their phones in between rounds. These guys were dominant. They were better than everybody else by pretty much a country mile. And it just goes to show that most of what you read and see on the internet usually is made up. So a huge shout out to Team Biffle with Sage, Shifty, and Biffle for winning the tournament. It was really impressive. And as somebody who is competing in their first Warzone LAN, I was very, very impressed by just how easy they made it look. It was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. As always, folks, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, and I'll catch you again in the next one.